hesitated. No principles, no backbone. We Conservatives forced this investigation and were vindicated. But this isn't the end. Questions remain. What did Keir Starmer know and when? Did he mislead the public? He has now lost a Deputy Prime Minister after losing a Transport Secretary, an Anti-Corruption Minister and a Homelessness Minister to scandal. His government...
Rachel Reeves under fire. The £50 billion black hole battle. Before we dive into today's political theatre, if you're passionate about understanding the real machinations of Westminster, hit that subscribe button and join our community of informed political observers. Now, let's dissect the latest drama unfolding in the corridors of power. The Chancellor is fighting for her political life, and frankly, it's becoming rather unseemly. Rachel Reeves finds herself in the unenviable position of defending what appears to be the indefensible while simultaneously attempting to project confidence in the face of mounting economic turbulence. The optics, as they say in Westminster, are absolutely dreadful. Picture this scene. Borrowing costs soaring to a 27-year high, markets growing increasingly jittery, and the Chancellor appearing on BBC interviews with a kind of defensive posture that screams everything is fine whilst the house burns down around her. It's political theatre at its most uncomfortable, and Reeves is decidedly not enjoying her starring role. The numbers are stark and unforgiving. Independent think tank NISA has calculated a staggering £50 billion black hole in government finances. $50 billion. That's not a rounding error or an accounting discrepancy. That's a kind of fiscal shortfall that keeps chancellors awake at night, pacing the floors of number 11, wondering how on earth they're going to square this particular cycle. But here's where it gets deliciously political. Reeves has dismissed e-projections with a kind of casual disdain typically reserved for opposing backbenchers during Prime Minister's questions. A lot of them are talking rubbish, she declared to the BBC, which is precisely the sort of language that sends Treasury civil servants reaching for their strongest tea and longest cigarettes. When a chancellor starts using phrases like talking rubbish to describe economic analysis, you know the pressure is building to uncomfortable levels. The timing couldn't be more exquisite from a political drama perspective. Here we have a chancellor who rode into office on promises of fiscal responsibility and economic competence, now facing the very real prospect of having to perform the most politically toxic maneuver in the Treasury playbook, raising taxes or slashing spending. It's a kind of impossible choice that destroys political careers and ends ministerial ambitions with ruthless efficiency. Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride, clearly sensing blood in the water, has accused the government of stalling the budget in the vain hope things might get better. It's a devastating line of attack because it rings true. There's something almost pitiable about watching a chancellor desperately hoping that economic reality might somehow bend to political necessity if she just waits long enough. The Conservative assault has been relentless and, one must admit, rather effective. They painted this Labour government as economically clueless, stumbling from crisis to crisis without a coherent strategy. Stride's accusation that they don't know what they are doing might be partisan rhetoric, but it's a kind of partisan rhetoric that sticks when borrowing costs are hitting 27-year highs. Reeves' response has been to double down on a commitment to getting the balance right, which is precisely the sort of meaningless political phraseology that makes seasoned political observers want to throw things at their television screens. Getting the balance right? What does that actually mean when you're facing a £50 billion shortfall? It's the equivalent of saying you'll handle a house fire by managing the flames responsibly. The self-imposed fiscal rules that Reeves has declared non-negotiable are starting to look less like principled economic policy and more like political straitjackets. She's committed to funding day-to-day government spending through taxation rather than borrowing by 2029 to 30 and to reducing debt as a proportion of national income by the end of this parliament. These might sound like sensible fiscal targets, but they become politically explosive when you're staring down a £50 billion deficit. Labour's election promises are now returning to haunt them with the persistence of particularly vindictive ghosts. No increases to income tax, national insurance for employees, or VAT. Promises made to working people that now look remarkably naive in the harsh light of economic reality. The employer national insurance increase in last year's budget was just the beginning, and the hospitality sector's howls of protest should have served as a warning of things to come. The speculation surrounding potential tax increases has reached fever pitch, and Reeves' denials are starting to sound increasingly hollow. Property taxes, bank levies, capital gains adjustments. Every possible revenue stream is being dissected by political commentators and economic analysts with the enthusiasm of pathologists examining particularly interesting specimens. When a chancellor has to repeatedly deny tax rise rumors, it usually means those rumors are closer to reality than anyone would care to admit. What makes the situation particularly delicious from a political observation standpoint is Reeves' insistence that people speculating about budget contents are talking rubbish and being irresponsible. This is classic deflection technique, but it's being deployed with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. When you're reduced to attacking the messengers rather than addressing the message, you've essentially conceded the argument. The international context provides some cover, with global borrowing costs rising across developed economies from the United States to Europe. Reeves has seized upon this with obvious relief, arguing that the UK's situation reflects global pressures rather than domestic incompetence. It's a reasonable point, but it's also the kind of explanation that sounds suspiciously like excuse-making when you're the one holding the Treasury brief. The international context provides some cover, with global borrowing costs rising across developed economies from the United States to Europe. Reeves has seized upon this with obvious relief, arguing that the UK's situation reflects global pressures rather than domestic incompetence. It's a reasonable point, but it's also the kind of explanation that sounds suspiciously like excuse-making when you're the one holding the Treasury brief. The comparison to other countries might be valid, as Reeves claims, but voters and markets don't particularly care about comparative performance when their own economic prospects are deteriorating. Saying everyone else is struggling too might provide some political comfort, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem of a government spending more than it can afford. The welfare state has emerged as another political minefield. Reeves comments about ensuring the welfare state remains available for those who genuinely need it whilst getting more people into work sound reasonable in principle, but they are loaded with political dynamite. Any attempt to tighten welfare eligibility or reduce spending will face fierce resistance from Labour's own backbenchers, where the two-child benefit cap reversal campaign continues to gather momentum. Stephen Tim's upcoming review of disability benefits represents another potential flashpoint. Every efficiency drive in the welfare system generates passionate opposition from advocacy groups and concerned MPs who see any reduction as an attack on society's most vulnerable members. The political arithmetic is brutal. Significant welfare savings require politically painful decisions that could fracture Labour's coalition. The broader economic picture that Reeves attempts to paint as positive seems increasingly divorced from the harsh fiscal realities facing her department. Talk of lots of positive signs and ensuring working people wherever they may be can live and experience the advantages of that development sounds like political boilerplate when you're simultaneously grappling with a £50 billion shortfall. Market confidence, that most fickle of political allies, appears to be wavering. The rise in long-term borrowing costs to a 27-year high isn't just a statistical curiosity. It's a direct challenge to the government's economic credibility. When markets start demanding higher return for lending to your government, it's usually because they are getting nervous about your ability to repay. This isn't the kind of market signal that chancellors can ignore or dismiss as talking rubbish. The November 26 budget date looms like a political sword of Damocles. Every day between now and then will bring fresh speculation, market volatility, and political pressure. Reeves has boxed herself into a corner with her fiscal rules and tax pledges, leaving precious little room for maneuver. The budget will either represent a masterpiece of political and economic balancing or a spectacular demonstration of the limits of campaign promises when confronted with fiscal reality. What makes this entire situation politically fascinating is how it exposes the fundamental tensions within modern progressive politics. Labour won office promising to protect working people from tax increases while simultaneously pledging to invest in public services and maintain the welfare state. These promises were always going to be difficult to reconcile, but the £50 billion shortfall has turned a challenging balancing act into what appears to be an impossible equation. The Conservative opposition, meanwhile, is clearly enjoying every moment of Labour's discomfort. Having spent their final years in office grappling with their own economic crises, they now have the luxury of opposition critique without the burden of responsibility. Stride's attacks have been sharp and effective, painting Labour as economically incompetent whilst avoiding any serious engagement with the structural fiscal challenges facing any government. The international dimension adds another layer of complexity. Reeves' insistence that the UK isn't immune to global pressures is accurate, but it also highlights the limited tools available to any chancellor facing worldwide economic headwinds. When global factors are driving borrowing costs higher, domestic fiscal policy becomes simultaneously more important and more constrained. The speculation about an IMF bailout, which Reeves has robustly dismissed, represents a kind of political nightmare scenario that keeps Treasury officials awake at night. The mere fact that such speculation exists in serious economic commentary demonstrates how precarious the government's position has become. When serious economists, to use Reeves' phrase, I even discuss a potential external intervention, you know the situation has moved beyond routine political management into crisis territory. As we approach the budget, the political dynamics become increasingly brutal. Every policy option carries significant risks: raise taxes and face accusations of breaking election promises, cut spending and provoke rebellion from Labour MPs, increase borrowing and undermine fiscal credibility. It's the kind of impossible political arithmetic that destroys chancellors and brings down governments. The Chancellor's insistence on working in lockstep with Number 10 is telling, suggesting coordination between the Treasury and Downing Street that will be essential for navigating the coming storm. The recent personnel changes in the Prime Minister's economic team indicate recognition at the highest levels that the current approach isn't working and adjustments are urgently needed. What we're witnessing is a masterclass in political pressure and economic constraint. Reeves finds herself caught between the immovable object of fiscal reality and the unstoppable force of political promises, with very little room to maneuver and even less time to find solutions. The next 3 months will determine whether she emerges as a chancellor who successfully navigated impossible circumstances or becomes another casualty of economic forces beyond political control. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the outcome remains tantalizingly uncertain. In a political landscape where economic competence often determines electoral success, Rachel Reeves is fighting not just for her budget but for her government's credibility and her own political survival. It's exactly the kind of high-stakes political drama that makes Westminster such a compelling theatre of power, ambition, and consequence. This is precisely why UK politics remains endlessly fascinating. Where else can you witness such a perfect storm of economic pressure, political promises, and personal ambition colliding with such spectacular potential for either triumph or disaster? Subscribe to UK Connors for more insider analysis of the political machinations that shape our nation's future, because in Westminster, today's crisis is merely tomorrow's footnote in the endless drama of power.